I know it's just a clock radio, but hear me out because it's definitely rather quirky. This is a Magnavox D3240 from sometime in the late 1980s, and it's actually been in my family ever since it was new. It originally belonged to my older sister, and then when she went off to college it got passed down to me, and I've kept it in my possession and used it ever since. It has a simulated wood grain finish on the top, and a large grill which does an excellent job of collecting dust, which I was unable to completely clear out. And it's deceptively large because the actual speaker is only here. It's only about 2 inches in diameter. And already we can see some weirdness of the controls. On top here it says functions control. What does that even mean? Like as if we wouldn't know these are the controls if they didn't point it out to us. But you have your typical mode switch for the radio and alarm. But instead of sleep, it says slumber. So they have these odd terminologies they use instead of the industry standard button labels. Then you have the controls for adjusting the time and alarm, but instead of the conventional hour and minute buttons, it has fast and slow. So for example, it's set 40 minutes past midnight right now, and you want to set it to like 5 p.m. You have to hold it down and just wait until it gets up to the desired time. And if you overshoot it, you have to go all the way back around again. You do get a slow control, but this is one of the reasons I'm making this video, because I have to clean these buttons. They're getting rather hard to push. I have to really push down on it to get it to register, so it probably has dirty contacts, and I figured if I'm going to be taking this thing apart, might as well do a video about it. But you do get a slow time advance if I can even get it to register. That's your slow minute by minute advancement. Then you get another one for adjusting the alarm, and it works the same way. And again, instead of what everyone else calls a snooze button, with or without the E on the end, it says repeat alarm slumber off. So that's your snooze button. Then on the front it gets even weirder because it has your typical red LED time display, but there's no colon between the hours and minutes. I don't think I've ever seen another clock radio or alarm clock of any kind which didn't have a colon. And there it mentions the battery backup, which it calls power back up. And then here on the tuning dial for the radio, unlike every other analog tuning dial I've ever seen, it doesn't go by all even numbers on FM. It starts out pretty normal, 88, 92, but then it goes 95, 99, 103. I've never seen that before on a tuning dial for FM radio. I don't know, maybe somebody at Magnavox had favorite radio stations on 95, 99, and 103, so they decided to point it out on the dial. The AM dial also gets a little bit weird because instead of going by hundreds like 600, 800, 1000, it goes 650, 850, and then it goes back normal 1200 and 1600. And there's your tuning dial pointer at the bottom with a log scale from 0 to 10. In case you don't know, the point of the log scale is that if you found some unknown station and you're unsure of its exact frequency, you could write down where it is on this decimal scale from 0 to 10. So you can say right now I'm tuned to 4.6, and you could log that down as the station's location on the dial. On the right you get the normal controls for tuning, volume, and AM and FM band selection. At least that's totally normal. Here's the bottom. It is UL listed, and it's manufactured by NAP, which stands for North American Philips, because Philips owned Magnavox by this point. Then here it refers to both hertz and cycles per second, which was well obsolete by this point. Pretty much everyone stopped using cycles per second in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Then look at the door for the 9-volt battery backup, which it calls power backup, but also mains breakdown buffer. That has to be the most British way of referring to it I've ever heard. No one in America has ever said, "By Jove, I do believe there has been a mains breakdown." Nobody in North America refers to the electrical supply as mains. And inside that battery compartment, it looks like it originally had a sticker saying use only carbon zinc batteries. And it looks like someone forgot to inspect it at the factory, but nonetheless it's still working. And sometimes when you plug it in after a power failure and you don't have a battery backup, instead of just flashing 12 o'clock like every other clock radio, it alternates between 12 o'clock o'clock and 12:01. Here's the inside, and I can see why those buttons are so hard to push. They're attached to a piece of foam, which of course has degraded with time. It's not quite falling apart yet, but you can see, especially these buttons, when I push on it, the foam actually splits apart. So that's going to need to be replaced. I have a slightly thicker piece of foam I can replace it with. It's interesting that the speaker was actually made by Pioneer. It's 8 ohms, 0.2 watts, and I think that's the date code 8524. So this was made in 1985. Here in the base, the circuitry looks pretty old-fashioned, especially the way they put wax to glue some of the components in place. The clock chip is a National Semiconductor MM5456N, also with a 1985 date code. And that looks like the radio tuner chip TEA5570. And I noticed it has a sticker identifying the AM tuner's intermediate frequency of 455 kilohertz. I believe that's the audio amplifier, but it's so buried in there and glued in I can't identify it. Here are the switches in the base that those buttons push down on. Some of them still have a nice clicky tactile feel, but those two that are getting rather hard to push don't have much of it left. They still work, but definitely getting rather worn out. I'm going to try spraying a very little amount of electrical contact cleaner in those switches. You definitely don't want to overdo it. Sometimes I see people really hosing down controls with this stuff, like pshh, and it just makes me wince because they're putting way too much of it in. This can actually has adjustable spray. I'm going to put it all the way on low. Just a little amount. These I can really just drip them in because they don't need that much. Those top ones are not having trouble like the lower ones. And now just work them in. I forgot this one down here, but that one didn't have any trouble either. So just drip a little bit in that. And just work at these buttons a little bit. Put some in this switch. Oh, that was a little too much, but that kind of switch can take it. The contacts are bigger compared to these little touch-sensitive buttons. And even though they weren't scratchy while I'm at it, I might as well spray the volume control and the band selector. I cut a replacement for this degraded piece of foam out of this slightly thicker piece of foam. So I'm going to glue that in place. The replacement foam has been installed, so hopefully the combination of this and cleaning the contacts of those switches will help make those buttons work better. Here's the first test before I screw it back together. One other quirk of this clock radio is that in order to get it to stop blinking 12 o'clock, all you have to do is hit the time set button. You don't even have to change the time. Just hitting that button cancels the blinking. Now for the fast time setting. Works fine. Never really had that much of a problem to begin with, but now it works fine. Let's see about that slow time setting. Yeah, I still have to really push on it to get it to work. I might try wedging more foam in there to build it up a little bit higher, but I think that button is just worn out. And same thing with the alarm setting. You really have to push on it to get it to register. Because I think those switches are just worn out from use over all these years. But there's the slumber, or what it calls slumber, what every other radio calls sleep. That's the AM radio tuner. And here's the FM tuner.
With high hopes and no expectations for the future. And to hasten the journey, we bring you now this hour of radio today. From WBEZ Chicago, It's This American Life, I'm Ira Glass. Today's
Never really sounded that great, but you can't expect high quality out of a 2-inch speaker, even if it was made by Pioneer.
Then they're the kind who make you feel like
Okay, that's the alarm.
with a blip.
The beep stays the same, but the
You
volume
can say whatever you want.
adjusts the radio. So if you want beep only, you just turn down the volume.
Margie Robbins listening to a magazine story about
Or you can
George
choose
Burns,
just radio without the
who at
beeper.
that point had been a movie star, a star of early television,
And that's your snooze, or what it calls repeat alarm. Actually, if I push on the buttons directly, they're not that bad. There's that alarm setting button. Yeah, it kind of takes a bit of force to get it to register, but it's not terrible. So what I'm going to try doing is taking this extra piece of foam and putting it on top of those buttons, the two of those that are having the most trouble, and see if that helps. Actually, there may be a little bit too much foam in there now, because as soon as I push on the time setting button, it automatically fast forwards. So that's no good. Now what I did is cut off a little piece of this original thinner foam and wedged that in there. And now it's acceptable. It works pretty good now. So I'm happy with that. I don't really have to hammer on those buttons anymore to get them to press. And these still work fine.
And a pre-show.
Everything works fine. So now it's working about as good as it's ever going to work. Now I can install the mains breakdown buffer battery, which as it recommends is not alkaline. Jolly good.
One night, years later, I was sitting at a restaurant in West Los Angeles when I saw George come in.
I'll leave you to make up the rest of that story.